Facebook's product Portal puts a name to the affordances of telematic connectivity enabled by digital networks. Although Portal has essentially closed, as it were, Portal illustrates for our purposes what we judge to be mischaracterizations of portals as devices that merely bring people into contact by compressing space-time. We'll speak later about what togetherness, the portacular, and the weird and eerie bring to bear on a post-control socioinformatics. Other than adding some more hardware to the trash heap of consumer IoT devices, Facebook's Portal brought little new to the table, essentially remediating video chat tropes as old as the personal computer. Consider, for example, Douglas Engelbart's Mother of All Demos from 1968. But perhaps Facebook believed Portal set itself apart from competitors to devices call to action. If you can't be there, feel there. What then for Facebook and Portal users, for a notion of the portacular born out of what Andrew Culp calls Google's connectivity thesis, does it mean to feel there? What's a portal?
Jake seems to have commented on the official Facebook Portal page with his answer. To see it, Portal, it's new. You'll know about it. That's image. The device uses computer vision to translate and scale according to sensed activity. As you strafe left or right, the camera follows you. We might understand Facebook's interpretation of the portal as a set of technologies aiming to give an immersive sense of co-presence by erasing spatiotemporal difference. So in doing so, Facebook normifies or typifies, quote, being there through its algorithmic description of vision. So we can refer to Ori Halpern's work on the cybernetic production of vision, or as well, sort of analog and audio would be looking at Jonathan Stern's characterization of the MP3 codec as normalizing what's sensible by the human ears.
But there's some work worth mentioning that circumvents ocular centrism, often in the form of paired objects promising intimacy, marketed towards people in long-distance relationships, which expands for our purposes our consideration of telematic devices or portals. A lamp whose mate lights up when touched, pillows that allow you to hear your partner's heartbeat, haptic wristbands that send touch messages, or teledildonics. In each of these cases, a notion of being there is invoked through an emphasis of stimulated spatiotemporal proximity or co-presence. This reminds of Facebook's concurrent advertising campaign, More Together.
What's more, being there, and now by extension, togetherness, is encoded via anthropocentric normalizations of identity. So, of course, what feels direct and connected is actually mediated by layers of abstraction, which predetermine the sets of potentials of technical ensemble. What's interesting about Facebook's rubric of being together is the way in which identity is deeply encoded both at the level of hardware, UUID, MAC addresses, SIM cards, etc., and software, IP addresses, Facebook user IDs, effectively governing the kinds of entities that can be together.
Here's another effort at using physical digital responsive media systems to create the conditions for more than human modes of togetherness. With this system, we improvised some games which asked folks to collaborate with each other, to engage the responsive dependence in various ways. In this sense, what we describe as portals creates folds and sutures, not in spatiotemporality, but in socioinformatics space. Here, plainly said, socioinformatics refers not to social computing as codified by Cold War research, but in informatics which takes seriously the stakes of emerging techno-social ensembles. Speaking about information becomes differences and the possibility of difference, which triggers and conditions the whole process of integration.
So when we say togetherness, we mean something different from Facebook, and we mean something different from being co-present. Togetherness is more than, quote, being there. Togetherness is a mode of resisting individualization and discretization. Donna Haraway works with tentacular thinking alongside the device of string figures. For Haraway, the tentacular makes attachments and detachments. They take cuts and knots. They make a difference. They weave paths and consequences, not determinisms. They're both open and knotted in some way and not in others, adding later that nets and networks are tentacles as well. We're really hesitant with this point. Despite the aspirations of the tentacular towards a, quote, elsewhere and elsewhen that was, still is, and might yet be, which gestures toward, but not at, the radical outside of H.P. Lovecraft, We are concerned Haraway's tentacular is over-reliant on the graph theoretical, on string figures, and on networks of actors.
And these are meaningful tools each in their own right, but the graph theoretical risks creating a disproportionately striated communication sphere. Alongside the ambitions of the tentacular, which feels towards an outside, what we'd like to begin to do here is rehabilitate the figure of the portal, or the portacular, which enables modes of passage between disparate territories, such as inside and outside. As always, it's important to remember, just because you've opened a portal doesn't mean you have to go through it. If Facebook and network interactions are too deeply encoded with identity and striated graph theoretical connectivity, radio provides a different notion of the portacular through its composition as part of the electromagnetic field. Consider the following. Unlike systems which run on network protocols, ham radio or amateur band radio technologies essentially do not encode identity at the level of hardware. Legally, an operator requires a license to operate in the US and must announce a call sign delegated by the FCC. But importantly, there is, however, nothing in the transceiver itself which imparts or demands an identifying mark of any kind.
This points to the profoundly material composition of radio transceivers and the physical nature of signal propagation and transmission. Signals of various bands may, for instance, be bounced off the ionosphere or celestial bodies, especially during certain solar and terrestrial weather conditions, varying with season and time of day. There exist two so-called skip zones, also called dead zones, in which transmissions are reachable.
Despite depictions of radio signals as lines, a radio signal is an electromagnetic wave which may radiate, be reflected, and transmitted with varying magnitude in different directions, while the ability to receive a signal is influenced not just by the position of an antenna, but by its physical dimensions, shape, material, and orientation in space. As such, radio resists the kinds of graph representations all too common amongst digital networks. There are no nodes or edges through which discrete bits of information are transmitted. These radiation patterns, and the space they occupy, are more aptly described by smooth manifolds. The successful communication of digital information through the air or across conductive materials represents a small subset of potential radiation patterns, limited not just by our communications technologies, but also by our intentions and the problems we wish to solve, which are often modeled as information theoretical communication processes, with distinct senders and receivers and everything in between merely noise. In other words, it's worth seriously considering what potential is more thoroughly material and physical and less semantically embedded forms of media metaphor.
Now we're going to speak about a project which investigates the potentials of radios with respect to opening portals to the weird and the eerie.
So the three of us came to radio after having worked to varying degrees under the umbrella of acoustic ecology, associated with field recording, soundscape composition, and archiving of so-called endangered soundscapes. With radio receivers, we and others have found soundscapes totally alien to us, which seem to elude the moralisms and hygiene haunting ecological studies and trends in soundscape composition to use art to elegize changing ecosystems. This project began as an intuitive exploration of urban space via radiophonics, driving around the city of Phoenix, Arizona. One begins this practice by tuning any AM radio to 530 kilohertz, but a car radio allows you to navigate more quickly to find area of interest. One may expect to find conservative talk radio or Christian evangelism, but instead there are no stations broadcasting at all. 530 kilohertz is the absolute bottom of the medium wave range designation, which is 530 to 1600 kilohertz, and therefore is not frequently occupied by broadcasts in the United States.
A second exploration occurred via bike ride in the city of Tianjin, China. Here the waves are empty of broadcasts at 1400 kilohertz, the opposite end of the spectrum. A slower mode of transport picks up frequent radiophonic variation among the tangled infrastructure of a dense metropolis. At first one hears only the sound of radio atmospherics. One may break it off here to noodle towards some other station, disregarding the random static. But if there lingers any curiosity, listeners may be pulled into an upside down, empowered by an imperative turn information theory on its head. Let noise become signal, let signal become noise.
What speaks is the radiophonic sonification of fluctuations of the electromagnetic field. These fluctuations are natural and anthropogenic activities alike, lightning, semi-truck brakes, and so on. These frothing, pulsing, undulating sonorities pull one into the tide, beckoning one to surf along the urban infrastructure, to diagram serendipitous attunements to excesses and entropies of monstrous complexity and motion, amplifying otherwise tacit aberrations from the efficiency and control of managed urban infrastructures and ecosystems. In the wake of the signal noise reversal undulates something eerie and electrifying. And outside, as day turns into night, rigid objects blur to gradient. Likewise, the radio makes no such distinction between outside and inside, environment and automotive body. There are no clear lines between them. There are no discrete notes. The stability of presentational immediacy, the reign of a reality appearing to us as individuated discrete objects, is thrown completely off balance. It's in this moment that we can begin to think with portals, to occupy the portacular, and to feel something outside pulling at our string figures.